Hello friends. My name is Igor Havrishak. This is the YouTube platform of Channel 24, December 27th, live broadcast. I will ask you to be active, like, subscribe, comment, write your questions and share our conversation. Moreover, our guest is very respected. He is a media expert. This is a media investor, investigative journalist Spiegel and insider Christo Grozev. Hello, Christo.
Hello.
Christo will probably begin our conversation with what happened just 2 days ago. This is a plane crash. Embraer of Azerbaijani lines was supposed to land in Grozny, but it was not allowed. And what is interesting, it is not yet officially known, and they will drag it out for a very long time. But everyone says that the Russian air defense in Grozny shot down this plane, and there is already an ultimatum from the deputies of Azerbaijan. They say take the blame, admit it, everything is honest. Why do you think this miscalculation happened, and does Russia admit its guilt, or, as history shows, they will never admit anything?
Yes, that's a good question. What happened, it seems to me, is obvious. This is a repetition of almost what happened 10 years ago with the downing of Malaysian Airlines Boeing MH17, when Russian anti-aircraft equipment could not distinguish. Then they acted completely illegally, of course, as now, but then they acted on the sly, on the territory of Ukraine, pretending that they were not there. This made it even more difficult for them to use the equipment available to them to determine the correct side of the aircraft, because again they did it very, let's say, on the sly. Now they were stationed with all the equipment that was available to them, and again they could not distinguish the airliner from what they took for a Ukrainian drone. What evidence is there? Yesterday I gave an interview to the BBC, where it was obvious that the totality of everything that we see in open sources, namely, fragments, holes, which are on the side of this aircraft, they are very similar to the fragmentary holes that we saw 10 years ago on the Mi-17. They are very similar in dispersion to what can be expected from the Pantsir anti-aircraft missile. We know that the Pantsir is located there, near Grozny. They boasted about it. We know that at that very moment, in which the pilots explained, told the dispatchers, that some kind of blow on the plane was heard. That it was then that there was a flash of such several anti-aircraft missiles that were fired. That is, everything suggests that the Russian air defense shot down this plane and that they believed that it was a Ukrainian drone. This, of course, is absolute incompetence, but this can be expected. To your question, what can be expected in the future? I think there's something interesting here. Namely, that the plane itself crashed in Kazakhstan. Russia's relations with Kazakhstan are ambiguous now. They began to somehow melt even before the start of the invasion, of Ukraine back in January 2022. When Kazakhstan was suspected by the Russian special services of creating these protest rallies that took place in Kazakhstan. Recently, information was heard in the English court and evidence was announced that the Russian special services were preparing special operations against the son of the president of Kazakhstan throughout 2023. This is to say that Kazakhstan cannot be expected to be too loyal to Russia, and it is very, very possible that the investigation will be really transparent. Of course, there will be pressure. Of course, there will be attempts to outbid the loyalty of both Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. But I think that this will not work. Will Russia recognize? But there is a risk that they will deny to the end, as they did with MH17. They can learn from the example, which gave 5 years ago, Iran shot down, if you remember, a Ukrainian passenger plane. But after the International Journalism Society and then I was working in Bellingcat, were able to prove to the public that there was no doubt that they were the ones who shot it down. The Iranian regime confessed and said that they did it by mistake. There is a possibility that in this case Russia will react in this way and say, you see, when it is true, we admit it, and when it is not true, we do not admit it. That is, such cunning on the part of Russia is also possible. But this will only be if they see that they cannot expect any cooperation from the Kazakh and Azerbaijani authorities. But we'll see it within a couple of days, I think.
Thank you, Christo. In the last month, in December, the special services of Ukraine worked very well on the occupied territory and on the territory of the Russian Federation. Among other things, they eliminated the former head of the Olenivka colony, where they kept our prisoners of war. Also in Berdyansk, another colonel was liquidated and, of course, General Kirillov, who was liquidated in Moscow. Tell me, please, Christo, how much this frightened the Kremlin, the special services, and how serious a miscalculation this is, because we all know who forgot from our viewers, when this General Kirillov left the house, as I understand correctly, explosives were planted in the scooter and the scooter detonated at a specific time.
Yes, it was one special operation, which will have a huge impact and a huge impact on Russia's ability to recruit people for such positions. But first we need to start with that the operation was done very clearly. One of the accusations, who used to be to the Ukrainian special services, who are doing liquidations on the territory of Russia, was that perhaps there is a certain carelessness, a certain ambition, and that innocent people could suffer from it. In this case, everything was done in such a way that even the most conservative Western critics would not have the opportunity to criticize. There was an observation, as the Russian special services themselves later admitted. There was live surveillance by the Ukrainian special services from a nearby car, where the phone transmitted a video signal in real time, and the scooter exploded only then. When it was clear that only the colonel himself, the general himself and his lieutenant were next to the scooter. Why will this have consequences? I've talked to those related to Russia's chemical weapons program, and the reaction to this liquidation is such that there is panic among these specialists, who could take a role and position in the future, which were liberated by Kirillov. No one, of course, wants to be the next target. In addition, there is another side effect in that, again, according to data from these sources, Russia was preparing a new illegal program for the use of chemical weapons. And very few leaders were privy to this, including Kirillov himself. And now to replace such a general with a new one who can be trusted with such very, very trustworthy information. Once again, such projects are not told to everyone, only to those who need to know. Now it will take some time before the FSB can agree with someone else to trust him, and that he agreed to take on this role of chief of chemical troops. Therefore, I think that there will be some kind of pause, there will be some kind of hole, there is definitely panic.
Christo, please tell us about Russia's war in Ukraine. We understand that on January 20th, the new president, Donald Trump, will officially be in the United States of America. And he repeatedly stated that he was ready, willing, and able to end this war quickly, but he said this so confidently before he won. After the victory he admitted that he would not be able to do it all so easily in 24 hours. And what is interesting, yesterday Putin, speaking in St. Petersburg, in his hometown, he said that neither in 5, nor in 10, nor in 20 years will we allow Ukraine to be in the North Atlantic Alliance. I have a question. Is this one of the conditions, allegedly, that he will offer Putin the freezing of Ukraine's accession, the neutrality of Ukraine? Was it directly Putin who rejected Trump's proposal? To what extent do you think Trump can really influence? Trump can do something, and is it realistic, by the way, that in the coming months, by the way, Polish Prime Minister Tusk and Erdogan spoke about this, that something should happen in the coming months and maybe the war will be over? How much do you believe in this?
First, don't take anything Putin says at face value. It is very likely that what he is saying now is raising the price of future negotiations with Trump. He knows that there will be an ultimatum from Trump. This was discussed a year ago with the team of Trump, the future president. When they were still in the candidates' team, that they would have an ultimatum. There will be an ultimatum to Putin. There will be, unfortunately, to Ukraine, in order to end the war as soon as possible. These ultimatums will come at a price for both Russia and Ukraine. I think that realizing this, Putin is now trying to simply distance himself from this ultimatum and intimidate Trump, so as not to include this very condition in the ultimatum, namely the mandatory accession of Ukraine to NATO. But, again, I think this is not the final position of the Kremlin. From the sources with whom I spoke, I understand that the Kremlin will even be ready to accept Ukraine's participation and the inclusion of Ukraine in NATO, but under certain conditions that exclude, for example, the deployment of American troops not only in Ukraine, but even the conditions to remove American troops from Eastern Europe as well. That is, perhaps, I think it's very likely that the Kremlin will agree to some kind of compromise in which Ukraine will join NATO, but on the condition that the American bases are removed from Poland, the Czech Republic and, of course, will not be in Ukraine. This may even be acceptable for Trump, but I think that such a condition will be unacceptable for Poland and for the Czech Republic. That is, there will still be a negotiation process. There will be conditions that, it seems to me, are unacceptable for certain countries, but what Putin is saying now cannot be taken at face value.
By the way, Christo, I want to record. You say that you spoke with sources and allegedly the Kremlin does not completely reject the option of Ukraine joining NATO.
This is the most unexpected thing for me. It was from Moscow sources close to the Kremlin that this position came.
But on the condition of the withdrawal of American bases, and then Putin will officially say, we drove the Americans out of Europe.
Here, he will sell it inside Russia, as a political victory, so that people forget that NATO has expanded to include Ukraine. And again, according to these sources, this is due to the pressure of the circle around Putin. That is, it is not his own idea, his own desire. But this is pressure from these oligarchs, who still want to somehow get rid of sanctions in the long term.
Christo, but you have many strong sources. Please tell me what you think. I will quote what the representative of Russia said. But remember that nothing should be taken at face value. Lavrov said the following: that Russia does not want any truce, only a stable peace. They have a slightly different stable world than for Ukraine and the normal world. And he also said two questions. Sorry that France allegedly tried to contact the Kremlin several times bypassing Ukraine. Let's start with whether it is realistic that Russia does not need a truce. Because what we face every day, we see that there are a lot of losses, a lot of equipment has also been lost, and the economy is also at the limit. And it seems to me that at some point everything may collapse.
Your question is absolutely rhetorical. Russia needs a truce, and what Lavrov says is the opposite. It only means that they need it even more than we thought. Lavrov is a typical. I just can't find a good word for the truthfulness of his words. They never appear, do not even correlate with reality. Therefore, what he says does not mean anything. Russia needs a truce as much and even more than Ukraine. Again, sources from within the oligarchic structures come out with the opinion that they do not know how long the Russian economy can live in a regime in which nothing is created, the added value is not created, the increase, the testament of these parameters, which optically look like some kind of improvement in the economy. This is only because the military-industrial complex creates a product that is destroyed on the battlefield, but also because of the fact that the average salary in the country increases because of the military salaries that are paid. And the average salary per population is increasing due to the fact that the population is falling. Therefore, they do not know how long the economy will last. It can be from 6 months, but it can be up to 2 years. But in any case, they see it as some kind of process, which will end sooner or later, so they need a truce. As for the second question, this is an absolutely informational question. Today I received information directly from the French government, which says that this is false information from the Kremlin. They have even, I think, published their position today, which says that no negotiations are going away from Ukraine, and that this is another attempt by Russia to sow division among allies, and that nothing of the kind could happen.
Christo, I also thought about Trump's statements, about your insider information. Could it be a secret conspiracy? What am I talking about? That Moscow allegedly says that we are not against Ukraine joining NATO, but the troops of the United States of America must completely withdraw from the European continent. But on the other hand, Ukraine must still receive a NATO offer. And here Trump will not say now. And what do we have? That Ukraine is not in NATO, the troops of the United States of America have been removed. Allegedly, officially Ukraine does not have neutrality, but there is no invitation to NATO either.
Of course, all this is possible. If Trump were the only person who made such a decision, I could have allowed such collusion. But the team that he still has, these are people, partly with extensive experience and with an understanding of the Russian threat. So I don't think they're so naive that such an alternative proposal will be accepted. Once again, I want to say a small clarification. Conditions under which the Kremlin, as I understand it, it will be ready. This is not to push the entire American army away from the European continent, but only from Eastern Europe. That is, in Germany they can lag behind, where they used to be, in France, in England, they can lag behind.
I would also like to ask you, Christo, tell me, please, how serious is the influence of the Russian special services on Eastern Europe? Because we recall the elections in Romania, there were also some forces in your country, in Bulgaria, which tried to influence the expression of will. How strong is Moscow in Eastern Europe now?
It can be said that it is less strong than it was in Bulgaria. It is definitely less strong, because even 5 years ago the influence in various special services and military infrastructure of Bulgaria was much greater. Now, after Bulgaria expelled a record number of fake diplomats, almost 70, a year and a half ago, even the ability of Russian services to recruit and work with their assets has decreased. Therefore, I see a slowdown and a decrease. In Romania, of course, it was an unexpected turn, which proves how there are holes in the system of protection and democracy in general, which can be used by people if they have the desire and resources, namely the opportunity through TikTok in one country to turn public opinion and get a significant part of society astray in order to vote for one candidate, who appeared out of nowhere and apparently had connections to the Russian services. But this is most likely an exception. This is an example that other countries will build on to prevent this. And even Romania, It had its own strength of the legislative system. To see how it happened. Cancel the elections. And to make sure that such external influences are not allowed into new elections. Unfortunately, the influence of the special services, the Russian special services in countries, such as in Austria, even where I have lived for 20 years, where we see that a significant part of their own representatives of the special services were recruited. It is not even known until now how many of them were recruited for money, and some of them for ideological reasons. Austria is trying to get rid of this somehow and wash its shame. But because the legal framework in Austria is not built to fight spies, espionage has never been a crime in Austria unless it is directed at the interests of Austria itself. Then again, the Russian special services found such a hole in this country, where you can work without consequences for yourself, but again Austria saw this hole and is trying to solve it. I don't even think, but I know, that there are legislative changes that will make espionage, any espionage, illegal and a crime inside Austria. That is, we see such a process. Russia has lost a lot of its capabilities due to the fact that there are no diplomats, because the Russians who travel are checked much more firmly than before. And so they try to find other levers, other holes. Unfortunately, they find such people among non-Austrians, not Russians. They are trying, for example, to hire non-Russians for their sabotage. They hire Moldovans, Bulgarians and, unfortunately, a huge number of Ukrainians from the territory under their control, who, due to the fact that they have the opportunity to travel in Europe without a visa, they agree to perform certain tasks for the Russian special service.
Risto, how do you assess the role and what do these two characters achieve? Otherwise I would not say, are they Fico and Orbán, the prime ministers of Slovakia and Hungary? Are they playing exclusively in their own interests or are they direct agents of Moscow? Because, excuse me, please, how come? You fly to Moscow, agree on something with the aggressor party, the one who attacked, and then you say, listen, the victim is Ukraine, I talked to the aggressor there is a proposal. But this is incomprehensible.
Yes, this is incomprehensible to the mind, and we can say that the European community reacted in this way. They criticize, they consider them absolutely traitors. Maybe not everyone calls them these words, but this is the feeling. Therefore, it is not even worth discussing. For Ukraine, of course, they should look like traitors, like terrible enemies of Ukraine. But it is important that almost all European countries perceive them in this way. And this is already good. Why do they behave like this? Of course, they are both populists. That is, they have their own domestic political goals. To be able to create cheap gas, to show that they are interested in the interests of their people and not in any European interests. That is, it is the center of their own political doctrine. But, of course, one can hypothesize that the Kremlin has certain levers on them. Specifically with Orbán. A lot of our colleagues from Hungary have long been saying that he may have had connections with representatives of organized crime in Russia in the 90s. And therefore, perhaps, there is compromising evidence on him. Therefore, perhaps a combination between populism and self-interest.
Thank you, Christo. I would also like to ask you about Trump's recent statements. I will start with the fact that the architecture of world security after World War II was destroyed by Putin. It does not exist. And no one is trying to build a new one yet, or is trying, but we don't know. And here is Trump's statement that I want to buy Greenland, to do something there. Canada is very beautiful, the 51st state. We have invested in the Panama Canal, the Americans should own everything. These are the statements of expansion. Could it be that with the arrival of Trump, they will try to negotiate with Putin in order to divide and to build a new architecture of peace and security in their own way?
This is the most terrible option. But even if we don't get to that, then such words on the part of Trump, even if they are pure populism and symbolism, which he uses to make Americans fall in love with him even more, even this creates instability in the world and legalizes, legitimizes, validates what the Kremlin is doing. This was also the case under the first Trump administration, when his willingness to negotiate with criminal regimes, his willingness to meet with the leader of North Korea, even call him a friend, his close association with corrupt leaders gave the impression that this was acceptable. And it created a greater desire among the candidates to become dictators, to be like that, because it is accepted as normal. In the new Trump administration, if he really agrees to change the world in illegal ways, but only on the basis of power techniques, this will give an even more terrible impetus to such processes. And then no one can tell Russia, you are the aggressor party. Because Putin can always point the finger at Trump and say, here he also takes away countries in this way, which historically, for some reason, are considered to belong to America. I do not think that we will come to this in practice, but the words themselves, I repeat, are very dangerous, because they legitimize Russia's actions. Why is he doing this? But again an innocent explanation that he is just a useful idiot, and not that he is in collusion with Russia.
Christo, I would also like to ask you about Trump's statements regarding the percentage of GDP that NATO countries should allocate to defense. This is 5%. Do you see the logic here? Because if you press so hard, because we understand that now about 50% of NATO's defense is the budget of the United States of America. In the future, this is the right move so that European countries can defend themselves, because Russia will not disappear from the borders.
That may be the only very useful thing Trump has done. This is a change in expectations and hopes from America's protection during the Trump administration among European countries and the understanding that the share of the budget should still be much higher than this 1.5%, which many countries considered sufficient. It is unlikely to reach 5%, but I already see how the countries who used to think that 2% is more than enough, now they are talking about 3 to 3.5%, so I'm sure we'll see more, as well as a higher share within the NATO budget from European countries than it used to be, which is good. And more generally, a high share of a gross product for self-defense, which will make European countries more independent of a possible American isolation president.
Christo, I would also like to ask you about Syria. What happened in Syria? How much does this hurt, perhaps, Putin's reputation? How much is he losing influence in the Middle East? Because officially he says that the goals have been achieved. The main thing is that the terrorists did not come to power. But it's very funny to me, because when Yanukovych fled to Ukraine in 2013, he told Putin that there was a coup in Ukraine. When Assad fled to Moscow with Syria, he said that the new government, we will negotiate. I can't understand how and when Moscow calculates who is a terrorist and who is not.
Whatever you like in terms of the conjuncture of the media space in general, I absolutely agree here that there is no standard for Russia. But the more important part of your question is, what consequences will it have? They are significant. I will give only one example, which I already see. What changes are taking place due to the fact that Russia has lost its control over Syria? Most of the presence of Russian special services and PMCs in Africa was built on the fact that Russia has proven that it can help one dictator in spite of so many opposition groups and different troops who fought against the central government in Syria, that it can help this dictator stay in power. Syria has been an example for so many African dictators who accepted help, asked for help, agreed to cooperate with Russian services in order to, so that they also remain in power. It turned out that Putin could not guarantee anything to Assad. And there is already an understanding in Africa that all these are words, and that, perhaps, they should negotiate not with Putin or not only with Putin, and, perhaps, to negotiate in general with other countries, with China, to negotiate with European countries on the legitimacy and acquisition of legitimacy of power. And this is a good consequence. This, of course, was helped by the tacit participation of certain Ukrainian special services, a certain activity of the Ukrainian special services in Africa, who were also able to do it in time a few months before. How it happened in Syria to prove that Russian PMCs do not fully control the situation.
By the way, Christo, I am also a little regularly surprised when the main intelligence directorate says that we helped destroy the Wagner mercenaries in Africa. When it says that our soldiers and instructors of unmanned systems in Syria were there and helped. I have a question. Maybe you have information about how much the structures of the special service and intelligence in Ukraine have grown after February 24, 2022? How strong have they become? Even remembering the beginning of our conversation, when we talked about the regular liquidation of generals, including in Moscow.
They have become much stronger. This is generally a fact that is recognized by all countries, even the Russian side. The important thing here is that it is a panic for Russia to recognize that the Ukrainian special services have become strong. Therefore, they will still and in the future always glue some mythical American NATO curators to the operations of the Ukrainian special services, or the central idea that comes from overseas. Again, the more they call NATO countries participants in such special operations, in which there is no NATO participation, the more this means that they recognize and fear precisely the improvement in the quality and quantity of shares in general, which originate from Kiev. Yes, we also see not only an increase, but also a greater geographical scale of these actions of the Ukrainian special services, but also an improvement in quality, an improvement in the limitation of side effects. What we talked about from the very beginning, more precise, more surgical operations that do not pose a danger to innocent bystanders.
Christo, and the last question. Tell me, please, for some reason, many people, including in Ukraine, and many leaders of other countries accepted Trump's victory in the elections, as if an armistice or ceasefire agreement was just about to be put on the table. As far as you know, do you believe that in 2025 there will be active hostilities or war in general, or something will happen and something should be agreed upon?
There is no insider information about this, because there is no such information as it is, either in the Kremlin, there are expectations, there are plans, there is a bluff, or in America. But you can analytically simply look at what Trump promised his close American oligarchs, so to speak. He promises he will agree with Putin, that he will agree with Zelensky. He will have the leverage to do this, because the Congress and the Senate are under his control. Therefore, he may open, say, a flood of new weapons for Ukraine, as part of his strategy to intimidate Putin. This, by the way, was part of his bluff, which was said before the election by his president, that he would use just such a threat, that he would give an unlimited amount of weapons to Ukraine if Putin did not sit down at the negotiating table. He has this ability because he controls both sides of Congress. Therefore, I think that if we look at the American trend, we will see an attempt, a real attempt and an opportunity to lead to some kind of agreement. If you look at what is happening in the Kremlin, again due to the fact that the oligarchy there and the security forces understand that it is impossible to make long-term forecasts in favor of the Kremlin, neither in the economy nor in military terms, then there will be pressure on Putin to come to an agreement. Therefore, having looked purely analytically, I think that there will be a process that should lead to some kind of peace in 2025. But here, of course, none of this can be solved without the participation of Ukraine, because what they can agree on may be absolutely unacceptable for Ukraine. And they must understand that Ukraine is not a state like Russia, where the people will accept what the government will impose on them. That the people also have their right. And they proved many times that if people do not accept, then they go out into the streets, since this will never happen in Russia.
Christo, sorry, one more small clarification. For example, Trump wants to end the war. He has already calculated this since 2023. He said it 33 times in his public speeches. Trump wants to end the war, and he does not care at all on what terms, on the terms of kindness, on the terms of sacrifices, so that the victim, Ukraine, defends its territory and in the future can claim to reconquer all the territories before 1991? Or does he not care at all? The main thing for him is that Trump came to the story, the war stopped?
Yes, unfortunately, I have to confirm that he personally does not care. This is my feeling. But once again, the team of professionals who still work with him, they care, they understand the risks of the Russian threat, which will continue, and they will go not only towards Ukraine, they will be towards America itself. Therefore, I think that he will not be allowed to lead to some kind of fake peace, on terms that are absolutely unacceptable to Ukraine.
Thank you, Christo, for this conversation, for the time. We are glad to see you on our YouTube channel. I really hope that this is not the last conversation.
Thank you, Igor. See you.
See you. Christo Grozev was with us. This is both a media expert and a media investor, as well as an investigative journalist, Spiegel and Insider Publications. Please like this video, comment, subscribe and of course share our conversation. My name is Igor Havryashak. We will traditionally see you on the air of Channel 24.